started with our next panel. Well, in recent years, the efforts to quash meritocracy has taken a step up within our educational institutions. The equity narrative has made substantial headway into dismantling our standards of admission and performance at the K-12, university, and medical arenas of education. Such attacks on meritocracy compromises not only the life success of the individual, but also the quality and value of education brought to our overall society, while putting our nation in a precarious position from which to meet the international challenges of the 21st century. It goes without saying that these systemic attacks on merit must be challenged, but in order to challenge something, you must first understand it. So joining me today are three gentlemen who will be discussing this particular issue. Going first will be Mr. Eli Steele. Mr. Steele is an award-winning filmmaker and is known for the film What Killed Michael Brown, which was his latest documentary. He's a graduate of Claremont McKenna College and Pepperdine University School of Public Policy. Steele's career's highlights include the recent How Jack Became Black, What's Fighting Seth, winner of 10 film festivals, and Katrina, an MTV network pilot which won him the Breakthrough Filmmakers Award. Steele has written for publications ranging from LA Times, Fox News, Quillette, to Commentary Magazine. Please welcome Mr. Eli Steele.
So I'm there to have a definition. I'm going to speak probably on a personal level. For the last year, I had the opportunity to travel across America and meet a lot of people and hear a lot of different stories. So there's two different stories that I kind of tell you, and I think they reflect two systems, two value systems and different cultures within our education system, especially with how we are dismantling the tools that we need to succeed and why that may be. So the first story is in the west side of Chicago. Right now, the west side of Chicago is probably the most violent part of Chicago. The south side has a reputation, but the west side is just a nightmare. And the schools are falling apart. Pretty much the whole story there. And so there's several shiny spots in that community. Urban Prep, State Mel, Providence State Mel. And these are schools that are pretty much black ones, people trying to hold on to American values and educate children. I was doing it was a kind of series called Top Revelation, and we ran for 100 days straight, and we told basically 150 stories. And it was on the south side of Chicago, we included the west side. And one of those stories was a young boy named Mario, 17, I believe, a young man, 17 years old. He scored the perfect score on the ACT. So you can imagine in that culture where education is not really a top priority. If you carry books, you kind of choose active white and so forth. So here's the kid. He's a star member of the orchestra, for the perfect score on the ACT. So in that community, the effect was very out there to very wishy-washy. It was all of a sudden like, oh, is that possible? Okay, we've been so negative, we've been beating down on people. And here's this kid, perfect ACT score. So it was really, it really had I think, an impact on our culture. All of a sudden we said, oh, we should do that. It was something that they could aspire to. And I'm not exactly sure if you want to go to college, but getting that perfect score, working hard for it. His mother had a free job, including delivery meals at night. So this is a poor family. And so you can imagine the culture shift. It's not even the culture, but shift in Mario now he had that confidence. he has that stamp that he can go anywhere and say, no, I did it on my own. So that's a tremendous power to have. Now, the second part of the story is, did you travel out of the west side of Chicago, very industrial? The first city you're going to hit outside Chicago limits Oak Park. And Oak Park is basically the Pasadena of Chicago. It's where Frank Lloyd Wright, Ernest Hemingway were born. So it's beautiful, idyllic village. And Oak Park also has a reputation of being very proactive in the integration efforts after the 60s. You passed an anti-discrimination bill regarding housing. Oak Park passed it on. And Oak Park also made sure that loans were readily available, that there was no discrimination. So it's a very proactive community, so they have a lot of black families that moved there out of other parts of Chicago. And so they have it going on in the 60s, 70s. Then all of a sudden, in the probably about maybe 10 years ago, they started noticing there was racial disparities between students. White students would perform, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but they were performing significantly better. So Oak Park decided to embark on, a anti-racism, TRT, DI, whatever, all of it amounts to lowering the standard. So they dismantled the honors program recently. They removed variables like being late, truancy, all that stuff. Just to sort of try to erase the disparity between black and white students. There's a family in Oak Park, and they are an interracial couple. So you can imagine having CRT, having the kids learn about oppression versus oppressed. And then you come home to an interracial family, and the mother is actually in the west side of Chicago. The father is a poor white guy from Connecticut, and he, being poor, he grew up in the basketball culture, so his friends were all minorities. So look at him now, white guy. But TRT doesn't care about that, so the parents were very upset about the direction that the school was going into. They were hearing things like white supremacy everywhere. It's in the air you breathe, it's in the water you drink. So it's a very basalistic type of culture. There's no farming, nothing. So you have the west side fighting to go the other way, and then you have a very wealthy community going down the other way. And what's interesting about that is that, so the parents, that family has now pulled the kids out of Oak Park. They're homeschooling the two children. That means one parent can work. So they're losing income. But they value the education, they value the kids' education, so they're working very hard. And so what's interesting though for me is that you see a poor community over here fighting to hold on to the American values. And you see a wealthy community over here, I guess maybe with the wealth privilege of taking the American values for granted. And so that's the picture of where we are today in America. As for Oak Park, what they're doing is no less than racism. You can call it systemic racism. Because if you don't think that black can succeed or overcome whatever obstacles there may be, whether it's a cultural issue, a value issue, then you're perpetuating the stereotype. You're deciding fate. You decided your education program on that, and that's only going to lead to more failure. That's only going to lead to more disparity. And so, I know it's not a very optimistic thing, but I think what we need to think about is, and why we have to figure out ways to shift the American culture so that we can embrace what the people on the west side of Chicago, even the people I know on the south side of Chicago know, which is the American principle, the American dream. It's the only way out, period.
beauty. It's a question of beauty, not content.
You want both. We're going for both.
Okay, can we be seen by the camera?
Our next speaker is a stoic writer, data engineer, and author of the award-winning blog Cobb. He has been published in Newsweek and was a regular NPR contributor, host at Cafe Unte, founder of the Conservative Brotherhood, Rights Universal, and Free Black Thought. His online writing projects include on political, cultural, and philosophical subjects reach back over 23 years. His latest project is Stoic Observations. Please welcome Mr. Michael Bowen.
I'm going to do something a little different here. Generally, I work one of two ways. I'll go completely extemporaneously and talk about anecdotes. And the other is I will do a 40-slide presentation, statistics. So I'm going to do a hybrid in that. I'm really glad to be back here in San Diego with my friends from CFER. You guys are really doing the good work, and I'm proud to be associated with you. I want to talk about something that we're doing right now. The focus at Free Black Thought this month is on education. And so we're looking at homeschooling, and our latest published essay in the Journal of Free Black Thought is about DEI, K through 12. And I'm fortunate enough to be old enough to remember when SEL was good. Kids went through something called character counts. And it was very important. And they took a pledge for lifelong learning. And we're kind of regressing from that. And I can even remember a year or so ago, I looked at the character counts website and had a BLM banner that took you off into another website, which was full of the kind of rhetoric that we all know and despise, because we know it's not good for us or our children. And I should take a moment to remind you, and all of us, that what we allow to happen in our schools, whether it's in Kentucky or New Hampshire, it affects all of us. Because this is really about the dumbing down of America. It's really about undercutting the idea of meritocracy. I answer questions all the time. Do you actually think the American dream is real? Do you actually think that black people can achieve the American dream? Are black people being shot every day in the streets? And these are people not only here, but from around the world. And the eyes of the world are looking at us, but we should be looking at ourselves and wondering why we allow this to happen. And we can't let it happen because it can't be contained. It is a virus against the principles of our nation and our federation. And so we have to fight this because it is an existential battle. The question that the lady asked for of Benjamin Franklin, do we have a republic? Well, if we can keep it. And now we're seeing, you know, there was a guy named Tyler who once said, democracy begins to end when people can vote themselves money. And it seems to be what's going on. So in our mission to support education, we know that there's going to be some squirrely moves, and they'll say, well, we're not teaching CRT. And maybe they're just practicing CRT. Well, this is diversity, it's supposed to be good for everyone. But we know what everyone means when we say it. And so, rather than say this ESG program or that DI program, we're going to hopefully give you some clues as to what to listen for in the content. And it's important, as people have said before, to listen and ask questions and demand answers for what they mean. And we're going to highlight 6. Number 1, do you hear something about oppressed versus oppressor? With some racial assumptions about who was what. Number 2, do they frame America in terms of a white supremacy culture? Because there are some people who think that everyone any shade lighter than me is just 2 inches from Charlottesville. Are they segregating children by race or affinity groups? Is there going to be a separate graduation ceremony? When I think about this, pausing on that one halfway through, I think about where we started off with multiculturalism and how hard it has become. And we're not even actually talking about culture anymore. We're just mapping it to race. And that's why people have questions about cultural appropriation. Is it appropriate for someone of your race to dance on TikTok? Is it appropriate for someone, if you don't like Mexican food, does that mean you don't like Mexican? Okay. And that's where this hard multiculturalism has gone. And I remember reading a book by Nathan Glazer, a prominent social critic, said, we are all multiculturalists now. Because they threw their hands up. They said, we can't integrate everybody, so we might as well have a tossed salad instead of a melting pot. And we kind of accepted it. We can have 1,000 different channels. And the kids can have a youth culture, and the hippies can have their culture, and the alphabet people can have their various cultures. And we can all have pride in everything but e pluribus unum. In everything but America. In everything but the traditions that got us to where we were. Is there constructive versus critical or liberated ethnic studies? We study ethnicities. I'm going to quote from the book that we studied. Are they race norming standards? Can they say, well, we're going to make an exception from this objective because it couldn't possibly be objective if it comes from Western society? That's not objective, is it? And that's really painful for me as an engineer. Finally, the misuse of the term implicit bias. Okay. As an example, we put some there from something called the Pollyanna Racial Literacy Curriculum. So the academics and scholars within Free Black Thought have put together this, and there's a PowerPoint that you can download that have all these details in them, an example of the crazy things that we know are crazy, but people can't deny that they are happening here in the United States. And it's maybe not in your school district, and maybe nobody in your school board is approving that, but let's remember something. When my kids went to elementary school, and when they got to middle school, they started music instruction. And I said, okay, yeah, let's do it. And I remember the director said, why is it important in our school district that we teach kids to read music? Because there's nothing quite so unifying as children singing together. And they sing in harmony. And everybody's voice is always different. It might be a bass or a tenor or an alto or soprano or mezzo-soprano. And you will have your part. And everyone won't sing at the same time. Sometimes the higher voices will sing, sometimes the lower voices will sing. But they will maintain the rhythm and the content. And there's truth and beauty in it. And this is something, if you don't learn that, if you never learn to read music, what kind of music will you hear? The lowest common denominator. And you can't say that you haven't heard that. And you can't say that you haven't heard the horrible lyrics and the content of today's music. And you can't say you haven't heard the auto-tune or technology that somehow makes you a singer. And you're really not a singer at all, you're just a recording artist. I'll close with this quote from 1933 about an assumption This shameful status of higher education is due in large measure to low standards of institutions with a tendency towards the diploma mill procedure. This is written by Carter G. Woodson in a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. When you determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel that he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status. He will see it for himself. If you make him feel that he is an outcast, you don't have to order him to the back door. He will find it without being told. And if there is no back door, he will demand that you make it.
So Woodson was the founder of what we now have as Black History.
One of them.
He's the real original superstar of African American history.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Our next speaker is a senior fellow and director of the Center on Educational Excellence at the Independent Institute in Oakland. He was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development during the George W. Bush administration. He was for decades a research fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. In 2003, in Iraq, he presided over the K-12 school system as part of the U.S. Occupation Authority. In 2016, he headed the Trump Penance Transitions Agency Review of the U.S. Department of Education. He received his BA, MA, and PhD degrees in political science from Stanford University. Please welcome Mr. Williamson Bill Edwards.
So please tell me if there's any problem hearing me. Everything fine? So I'm going to begin talking about a paper that's gotten a lot of attention, and it's about meritocracy and homework. So if you think about it from a teacher's standpoint, you get different things from students. Some kids turn in excellent homework, some kids turn in not so good, some kids don't turn in their homework at all. So the question is, how to think about this? And the author of this, the authors, the co-authors, have this title, "You Need to Be More Responsible." And that's the racist thing for the teachers to say to the students. That's the white supremacist thing to say to the child, you need to do the work. You need to figure out how you can work so you can succeed in this class. They don't want you to do that. So the teacher has to think about how to explain the different situations, or we as outside observers have to think about the homework differentials here. So it could be that the teacher is assigning homework that is on material that really hasn't been covered in class. It's not even just somewhat of an extension of what has been covered in class. It's really not something that's available for the kid to do independently. So that's just bad teaching. That's not some kind of problem and mistake on the part of the students. That's a mistake on the part of the teachers. Okay, so then a student could have less interest, put in less effort. Now, the writers of this paper say, well, that might be somewhat of a role, but they don't want to give that any importance. The thing they want to put the importance on are differentials of home environment. And this is where they say class differences, racial differences, ethnic differences, and so forth are in play. And so it's a non-supportive environment, structural inequalities in students' lives. So what they don't want the teacher to do is to say, okay, you're the student, you're responsible, figure out how to overcome your difficulties. We're all in different situations. They want to assume that it's there's no chance for this kid to overcome that. Now, if you think about it in your own lives, I love my parents, but sometimes I had to go beyond my parents in terms of pursuing my interests. And sometimes you just have to overcome inadequacies of your parents. I mean, that's just part of life. And we aren't all similarly situated. We're different. We have different goals. We have different priorities we put on the long term. We're not all the same. Even Karl Marx, who some of these egalitarians seem to like, says in the critique of the Gotha program that not every worker works as hard or puts in as much time as the others. So people are different. Okay? So the egalitarians, the anti-meritocratic people, don't want to recognize that people are different, and that a meritocratic structure rewards people for their vigorous use of their talents. Now, the question that then is raised by some of the anti-meritocratic people is, well, you don't deserve your talents. You don't have a moral right to your talents. Your talents actually belong to the state. Okay, so think of ancient Sparta. They had state slaves, the helots, okay? So all kind of state slaves. Of course, this is not some obscure set of people that believe this. This is the doctrine of John Rawls in his famous theory of justice. He says that the distribution of talents is morally arbitrary, and he essentially wants to requisition them. Okay? And there's also a huge school of philosophers called luck egalitarians, and they also say luck or any advantage that you have that you should have essentially confiscated from you. Now, I think we need to actually, we don't want everybody to be state slaves, and although we're for a meritocracy, we don't want to see some kind of merit czar who says, oh, well, what you're calling merit you don't really deserve, so we take that away from you and put it somebody else, something like that. So you have to be careful that you want meritocracy within the realm and structure of freedom, okay? So you don't want to destroy civil rights, human rights, property rights, and so forth in the name of meritocracy. Remember that these bureaucrats and politicians will try and use any slogan to give more power to themselves. So, but anyway, critics of luck egalitarianism, critics of Rawls will say some things like the following. So one of the famous critics is Robert Nozick. He liked John Rawls, was a professor of philosophy at Harvard. And he said, well, I'm a witty, handsome person, and what if I'm courting someone, and someone else is also courting that person, but I, who don't really deserve, in some weird sense, being handsome, by the way, he was very handsome, and don't deserve being as witty, as charming as I am. By the way, he was actually very witty and charming. But should I be punished, and the woman that might be choosing go with the suitor that doesn't have? No. I am me. I am what I am. And it's the same with all of us as we go in with the talents that we have. They're ours. They don't belong to the state. Okay? So anyway, these people that don't want us to enjoy our talents, and they don't want us to have our talents acknowledged as ours, they say, well, what are we going to do? If we mark down students for inadequate performance on homework, well, that's racist, and that's class-bound stereotypes, and they call this status reinforcing. So that's their horrible label that they pin on a teacher who holds the child responsible for turning in his or her homework. And it's bad to, likewise, to grade them on effort or homework completion. Even if the kids are from the same exact socioeconomic framework, in this paper, they give an example of two kids from lowest socioeconomic group in this school district, and one turns in their homework and the other doesn't. And so it's wrong to hold the one that doesn't responsible. And to me, that is exactly going to be self-defeating. The thing that's really self-defeating is to say that you're not going to hold individuals responsible, because then you are actually, you're putting every incentive to hold them into a status where they're not fulfilling their potential. So there's an African-American social scientist, Bowen, and he had something to say on this. So I'm partly paraphrasing him. If you have quotas, it's talking about companies here. Firms will set lower qualifications for racial minorities, membership, for example, in lower castes in India, or female sex. And then these, with the lower qualifications, these newly advantaged workers, by these lower qualifications, they're going to be persuaded that they can get the desired jobs without making an investment in training and getting skills. And this is not going to be good for the firms that are hiring, nor is it going to be good for the workers involved. And obviously the same thing applies in K-12 education and in higher education. So I think, you know, we have these fundamental problems with the argument against talents and against meritocracy. I want to say two other things. The first is, some people say, and this is not really an argument against meritocracy, you say the tests are bad, okay, the tests are inadequate. But what that isn't really an argument against meritocracy itself. It sort of is saying, well, if the tests were good, then we could be doing this. But I would add, of course, that the tests are quite good. For example, SAT and ACT, the UC faculty had a complete study, and they show that they do predict student success and student graduation and all these different things. And they're a good way to bring in qualified students who can handle the work at the University of California. So they do that, and then they dump the test anyway. You know, first using the supposed excuse of the COVID. So then there's another argument, and that is, well, the measures are accurate, and that's terrible. Okay, this is the flip of the first argument. So the famous critique of meritocracy is The Rise of the Meritocracy. It's a British book by Michael Young, came out in 1958. And he says it's terrible because it will recruit people out of the working class that are the potential leaders, and so they can't become leaders in the socialist movement in the future. They'll join the successful managers and capitalists, highly paid professionals, and that's a very bad thing. I think we can kind of dismiss that on the grounds that we would like people to rise as high as they want. And so the last thing that's his argument, Mr. Young's argument, which I will close with, is he says people will get alienated. People, if there's a true meritocracy, and these tests really work, which he thought they did, people will realize that they are where they are because they do deserve to be there. So the people on the lower ends of the tail will be extremely upset. They'll be depressed. They won't be able to handle this status. Because before they could just resent not being in a higher position. Now they're in this deserved lower position. And the answer to that is pluralistic society and different avenues of achievement and activity and life. So yes, we can't have a situation where everyone's at the top of the income pile, okay? But there's music, there's churches, there's boys and girls clubs, there's all sorts of actors. This organization, somebody that's doing this and is really important in this is not necessarily in the 8 other things they're doing in their life as high as they are in this organization. So we have all sorts of ways of achieving in a pluralistic society and getting recognition for our effort. And that's the answer to this supposed eternal depression that a meritocracy will bring. So what you don't realize is, I have actually, in front of you defeated all the major arguments against meritocracy that you're ever going to come across, because I read up before that. And so you're now intellectually armed if you run across this sort of stuff, that you can respond or feel confident that while poking around the internet, you'll find repetitions of what I just said. So thank you for mention a few other things that were sparked by it. So, Lori Romero mentioned the Latino case, Menendez versus Westminster was one of her first civil rights cases. And we discussed here earlier coalition building. And there's a fascinating case in that exact case, one of the earliest civil rights cases in the United States. The Orange County Register, in those days called the Santa Ana Register and the Anaheim Bulletin, were edited by and published by R.C. Hoyles, who was a full-blown libertarian. In other words, Rand Paul, Ron Paul, etc. He supported the Latinos in this case. So don't ever think that there can't be interesting, cost-cutting coalitions. So I also wanted to acknowledge and mention my wife, Anna Bryson. Please wave your hand. Is a great model of one of these activist school board members. She was 8 years on the Capistrano Unified School District in South Orange County. She was a fighter throughout for all these things that some of the most egregious things hadn't quite happened, but incipient things of them had come. And so she's glad to talk to anybody who's a candidate or share with anybody who's a current school board member, see her later on. And the last thing I wanted to mention is my co-author, is that Ev Moorman? Wave your hand, please. Is that Ev? He and I wrote a paper on woke math. And I know you might think, math? How can math, how can math be white supremacist or whatever? 2 plus 2 is equal 4, right? It's not racist. No, I promise you, it is. Math is racist. So anyway, we wrote this long paper on it. It's full of all delicious stuff. We have like 20, let's say 15 copies of it still left here. Judge to yourself, I really need this. There's more than 15 of you here. And he'll give you a copy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evers. For the next portion of this panel, I wanted to open up a discussion between our speakers themselves so we could all listen to hear your thoughts as to how to, for further discussion on this issue and to how to address it in our communities. The alternative is to open it up for early Q&A.
You should do early Q&A. What do you think?
Okay, in that case, I'd like to open up to the audience for questions and answers. This gentleman over here.
We've all heard education is not doing well, it's not performing well, although we are dumping billions and billions of dollars into education, more per capita than virtually every other country in the world by far. So what do we do to improve education? So what do we do to improve the results, the academic performance of the kids?
So the basic problem is the post office problem. Okay, so the post office doesn't work very well. Why? Because it's a government agency. So the public schools are a government agency. They face all the worst possible incentives. They don't. Teachers are not paid based on productivity. Productivity would be paid on the basis of turning out educated children, right? Not paid on that. They're paid on seniority. They're paid on stepping columns and so forth. And they have no incentive to do their best. And also, poor teacher is like a rotten apple in a school and it starts dragging down there. So you need as much as possible to get good incentives in there. We just had these terrible NAEP results where it's declining or whatever. So again, we need to be teaching phonics, not balanced literacy or whatever the current look-say method is nicknamed. We need to be having teacher-led classrooms in math, not discovery learning, student self-discovery, inquiry-based learning in math. It's proved there's 50 years of top quality control group studies showing that one works better than the other in teaching math. Yet, what dominates in California? What's going to be in the new math framework that they're doing right now? The entire thing, 100%, when it's not woke and racist stuff, is inquiry-based learning, which is proven not to work, but they're doing it. So if you had competitive pressure, if you had educational savings accounts, if you had privatization, whatever you had lots and lots of charters, the pressure would be there to do what's effective.
What was that term?
Inquiry-based.
Don't go further.
Yeah.
I think probably it's also really, it's part of the whole culture in today's America. We lift up politics and race, which are like the lowest common denominators in America. We put that all in the top. We've taken all their values and, merit, everything, we put that in the bottom. So education schools are organizing themselves around politics or race. What can you do with that? How can, I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. They have no idea what ideology is, they have no idea what that stuff is. And that's what we teach you to get. So we have to, the part of it really is the culture shift. And so, parents really have to become more involved. The other way is, I think you know that here, the other way is lawsuit. I just did a short documentary on Jody Shaw. And what we did was she was basically saying we have to set a precedent. We have to have lawsuits and make people fear, I can't cross this line and so forth. And I'm also part of BEAR, and we had a very interesting thing where I remember all the details on the website. But the University of Chicago Medical School was kind of organizing things around race, and we wrote them a letter. And they said, oh, okay, and they kind of backed off. So it was that simple. So I think that, it should be proactive, use these tools in America to fight back. That's a real key, but you really have to start with culture, I think.
I have 3 ideas. One of them is not going to be popular, so I'll say that one first. I went to public school and I went to Catholic school. And I happen to know a large Black Catholic community in Los Angeles. And those parochial schools had discipline and they had school spirit. And when you were in one of those schools, you felt it was incumbent on you to bring pride to your school. So they taught values, and they said, do good by your school. And kids would be embarrassed not to know the work. They want to show up and they want to say, if we do good, our school will get represented at the better Catholic high school. And they all felt that. And we didn't have a choice, we had to wear a uniform, so we didn't have these non-meritorious ways of distinguishing ourselves in class. And also because it was a paid school, we didn't turn the kids into little fundraisers. Okay, they had uniforms. And they didn't have to pay for them. We had maybe a candy drive, but that was about it. So that's number one. Restore school spirit and get people kind of a value-centric. And even if you can't do it, somehow find a way to refund those schools, because they figured out the meritorious curriculum, and they're struggling. They are struggling. And some of those schools have had to close. And it's a tragedy. The second thing is, in a selfish way, somebody like me, who's had 35 years in IT, I'd want to teach at a high school if the high schools weren't so bad. And the fact of the matter is, math and science teachers with degrees in those areas are well paid outside of education. We have no incentive, except the goodness of our hearts, to share what we've learned over our entire careers. I had to stay out of college for 4 years, had to work my way through state school. So I had to take the bonehead math. I took all the math I needed to get me ready for calculus in 1 year. And I was the first degree math professor that I ever had in my life. And I was 23 years old when this happened. Okay? It is very rare to have good degree math teachers in high school and science teachers. So I was fortunate to have some of that in prep school, but then that gap, we had to make up for it. So make schools someplace that I want to go teach and not be afraid. And the third is, like the UCLA professor mentioned this morning, leagues. Nobody wants to shoot threes against Steph Curry. All right? You're going to lose. Nobody wants to get in the ring with Mike Tyson. So admit that competing with your peers in a league that's appropriate for your skills is good. So if we're going to reimagine public education, let's reimagine where we can have kids go to any school in the whole district and have leagues where they...
Laning, though. Laning, the idea of laning really is that you're put with your approximate successful level.
Yep.
And then there's another lane, and then there's another lane. Yep. And you can move between lanes. We don't want hard and fast locked-in tracking. We want laning that you can move, or you can take a course in the summer to climb a lane.
Yep.
And you're not tracked simultaneously in every subject. You're laned where it makes a difference. So you could be average in English, but high in math, or the reverse.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, why not vocational schools?
Exactly.
We can't always depend on...
I want to reinforce what has just been said about Catholic schools and some other independent schools. So there's actually, going back decades to James Coleman's pioneering sociological work in education, he discovered a thing called the Catholic school effect, in which similarly situated socioeconomic levels of children are a grade ahead in the Catholic school, a grade ahead, okay? And one of my colleagues in the Bush administration, Andy Smerrick, who's been on the State Board of Education of Maryland, very bright, clever guy, has written, he wrote one report to the White House on it, but he's written subsequently about Catholic schools and what they have going for them. It's very hard to reproduce in the public school because they don't have the same incentives and the same moral cohesion that a Catholic school or various other kinds of religious and independent schools can create. So I think we're going to be successful in the United States. We have to either figure out how to very radically change the incentives in the public system, which would be very hard, if not impossible, or we need to transfer more kids into independent schools. And I will say one other slogan, I'm talking about things that are impossible. This goal of everybody being equal that the anti-meritocratic people had is actually impossible. Remember all the stuff I said about how different we all are?
Amen.
Okay, so if we're all different, we can't be all the same. We're differently situated. We had different upbringings. You can't have everybody, and there's a statement that Immanuel Kant, famous philosopher, said, paraphrasing him, ought implies can't. If you say there's something that ought to be the case, that should be the case, that morally must be the case, it has to be something that's possible. If it's not possible in the natural world, then you can't say you must do that. And so if it's impossible to make everybody equal, it will only be an excuse for tyranny. It will not actually achieve equality.
And that in that spirit, the creating equals the PEI.
Right.
Not the PEI.
Their standard
Yeah,
is strict equality. So it's just a mask for tyranny.
Yeah, because beyond grade,
That's right. There we go.
Next question. This gentleman over here, Carl.
At the risk of being provocative, I've run into a number of people who subscribe to the view that in many ways, our overlords are attempting to create a impoverished, plebeian, ignorant class of people who have very few options, own very little, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a grand conspiracy thesis. Do you believe that there's any impetus behind the failures of our education system that's purposeful?
I don't know if the conspiracy in part of America has already happened. The South Side of Chicago, there's a passion in Patrick Bush. He's been trying to raise money for community centers. And right down the block from here is the elementary school. 4% proficiency in math, 50% in reading. Now, of course, a big part of the blame goes on the parents. But you're talking about Chicago, a very wealthy city, how could that happen? And it's so bad. How do you flip the culture? How do you change the culture? Because every generation sends the kids to those schools. And, and so you need almost a revival in a way. So I'm not saying that, so what's happening in those communities is now spreading out. So if you think it's bad there, well, if you have Oak Park, Pasadena, type of community, very wealthy, and they're lowering standards all the way to removing the on the track. They're California removing the SAT. I mean, you should remove every measurement. You say, oh, you know what, I can be that good. Okay, what's next? Okay, then we remove that ladder. And kids need direction. They need something to aspire to. So you're going to get more. So if you continue this for 30 years, it's probably be irreversible because that factor in the South Side of Chicago, Leslie Card had the biggest battle in America in his hands. I'm not trying to be melodramatic. I'm just saying that you're trying to flip the culture, you're trying to change value, you're trying to get the government to. They know the government is the one that operates the school, and they don't care. I mean, they really don't care. So that's where we are in certain parts of America.
So I don't really think that there's deliberate effort to proletarianize the population or make the population ignorant. I think it's interesting in this paper that you can get from my co-author, Gorman, the writers, the most radical writers, the most deepest believers in this woke math, they want the kids to improve their math, but they just want the math to be used for revolutionary socialism. And if they have to choose between the kids becoming political agitators and having the ideology that they want to have and learning math, well then they'll pick, wokeness. But they would like the kids to have math and to use math for the sake of advancing this transformation of society that they want. So, and also the teachers like having the privileges, they like being able to advance on seniority, move to the schools with the better performing students and all that. Now, along with that, they would like the kids to do better generally, but it doesn't mean giving up going to have the easier kids and the more, schools that have kids that are all going to college or something like that. No, they're not giving up that, but they still would wish, if it wasn't a personal cost to them, that the kids would do better. I think that's the case. So I don't think there's deliberate holding people in ignorance. It looks as if there were, but I don't think
So I would say very misguided. There was an article in Newsweek, I think about 2 weeks ago, a teacher in Oakland, and he wrote the article, it's a black teacher, and he, I think in 2015, they were so suggested, they had all these ideology, so the thing was they were removed by it from the education system. And basically immerse the kids, these mostly poor kids, into literature, but not having to build the block, not having to really stand out the word, understand what string things mean and stuff like that.
Right.
So I kind of agree with you in the way I'm just saying that it was so misguided.
We'd like
Now
them to
he's
learn,
backtracking.
we'd like them to learn the literature, but without having to learn phonics.
Yeah, and somebody so this should be credited, thankfully, he backed off. So he's now back responding.
I think there's a certain elite that we tend to pay attention to, who really just don't know how to run any kind of organization where you're taking someone of average intelligence and you're needing them to, not to overweight the prejudice against the coasts. But I never heard of anybody who graduated from a college with an other than honorable. So there's a kind of value that we need as a citizen that we're not necessarily even looking at in our higher education. When I came here to speak last year, and I remember as soon as I walked into this hall, I saw the name Horace Mann. And I bet the Horace Mann was the high school that Kylie was teaching at, wasn't it? Now, takes care of his health, is orderly, exercises thrift, is prompt, has a sense of humor, is self-reliant, exercises self-control, stands up for fair play. Okay, if you have a 4.0 and you don't do any of those things, do I really want you on my team? So education is more than, it's not absolutely moral instruction, but we can grade it.
We want a good, sound culture, and that's a huge part of our children being decent and achieving. I wanted to say something about the dark Hatassel way of looking at meritocracy. So we actually had a version of this during the COVID lockdowns, right? Here are all these smart people with high degrees, supposedly smart, telling us what to do, right? The rule, so Plato had the ideal republic is the rule of these philosopher kings. They're the most highly educated people in the society. The progressive movement of the early 20th century, the whole idea was the rule of experts. We should defer to these social scientists who would tell us what to do. Communist societies, what is it? The party is full of these engineers and well-educated people, and they're telling everybody what to do, and they're designing the economy. Of course, the economy is actually a basket case. And, look what China is doing with its zero COVID thing. It's like destroying its economy, not to speak of what it's doing to the Turkmens in the east and all, Eastern Turkestan, Western China. All the many things that the top-down expert rule is doing to those people. So we want to have our meritocracy within a structure of freedom. We want to strive to let the able people do what they can do best. But we want to preserve our human rights and not let them go.
We're coming up on the end of our session, so I'd like to thank our speakers for hosting, for discussing this very important topic. Thank you very much.